want you to tell us a little bit about yourself, what exactly you do, and also a little bit about your company.
I'm the managing partner for a small firm, Mino Consulting, and we focus on essentially management consulting, and our niche is leadership and team development. And we work with organizations that range from government agencies all the way down to small athletic teams. Essentially what we've been working to do, and more pointedly, is leveraging the concepts that are pretty pervasive in business as it relates to professional development, and exploiting those and advancing those in the world of sport, working alongside coaches and athletic administrators. But at the same time, we believe that in that world of sport, not only is the athletic metaphor pretty rich, but the concept of performance is pretty black and white, where you win, you lose in sport, and we've been working to advance that in the world of business. So in terms of point of difference as it relates to management consulting, oftentimes we play off sport metaphors with business organizations, corporations, executives, so on and so forth, and at the same time we're working to advance business concepts, the idea of management consulting in sport. So there's this constant kind of swing of the pendulum in my world. But at the end of the day, if you drop a pin where business intersects with sport, that's really our focus.
Tell me a little bit about your book, Team Turnaround. Why did you write this book in the first place?
Pragmatically, the book really grew out of my business partner, Joe Frontier, and my writing partner as well, his dissertation. He embarked on this journey of trying to uncover and scratch away the surface of how professional sport franchises turned around. He had pretty strict criteria as to who he would focus on and study and so on and so forth. And in the process, he collected a series of interviews that, like I said, served as his doctoral dissertation. That concept was something that we believed we could build off of, and we had shopped it around for a while, and eventually Josie Bass expressed some interest, but asked us to advance on the sport stories and really build in some business and corporate stories. So in the process of doing that, in fact, we actually only kept 3 of his original interviews, if I'm not mistaken, and all the additional interviews were new. And in the process of building together this compilation of interviews, but that would really articulate this process of how organizations turned around, we just became more and more enamored with the project and put more and more focus in, not just to what this process was and how organizations go through this, but the idea that any organization can relate to this arc, and this idea that we're all kind of on this constant up and down swing and cycle of success and struggle and so on and so forth. And we're really working to advance this idea that anyone can be inspired to turn an organization around. It obviously takes a certain level of determination and skill, but at the end of the day, we really want to inspire individuals within organizations, struggling or otherwise, that they can, in fact, get to the top of the mountain if they just kind of keep at it and look at what other successful entities have done.
How did you come up with that name, Team Turnaround?
Yeah, the whole team turnaround concept really evolved out of this idea that you can rise up and, in fact, physically turn your organization around and really go from struggling to successful. And so, to a large extent, it was really just an intuitive title for us. This was just simply about, well, what is the process of going from failure to success, and it just made sense that it was simply turning around. That concept of leading through crisis, I think, is appropriate, but really what we saw in going through these interviews and going through this sort of exploratory process of writing the book was that leading through crisis was almost an element of the larger turnaround, that there are other phases and other stages that these organizations and teams were going through in addition to actually embracing the crisis.
Who is the perfect target audience for this book? Is it all the CEOs and the decision makers, or could be anybody within the organization who can read this book? Who are you planning to target?
That's a really good question. We're equal opportunists. I mean, I think that for us in writing the book, we really wanted to target a broad audience, and we feel like there's information in here that's not only relevant, but impactful to any individual on the team, so to speak. Because the team effort, as much as it that turnaround is going to depend on the leader, and we want the leader to read this book. We want the CEOs, we want the executive team to read this book. We also believe that, as I say, it is a team effort, and it is beneficial for the rising stars to have access to this information and people who are on the periphery. So to that end, I would say that in terms of a target, the rising star is definitely someone we would want to see this, but we also clearly we would like the CEOs and the executive team to read this as well.
You talked about 6 different steps an organization needs to take in order to turn the team around. Tell me a little bit about your step 1.
Leading past losing is really that critical first stage, and has a lot to do with just embracing the fact that we're struggling and that we're not doing as well as we think we can do. And that's something that is, on a certain level, seems obvious, but on another level is critical. We can't just continue to keep the blinders on and think that we're succeeding when we're not. But as simplistic as that might sound, a lot of organizations really struggle with that, because a lot of people want to believe they're where they want to be, or they're doing the best they can, or whatever the case is. Because to a large extent, it's easier to lose and not try than it is to try and keep losing. And inevitably, there's going to be a lag time between when you're putting your best effort in and when you see actual results. There's going to be a time where you keep struggling in spite of giving it everything you have. And that's really what we were trying to capture in that stage, that there is this period where we really need to acknowledge that we're not doing as well as we'd like to, and at the same time collect information and better understand the roles that are going to get us to move forward. And similarly, that let's look at where we're failing. So that's a lot of the sentiment behind that.
So step 1 is the confronting the brutal fact. Yeah,
exactly right. And anecdotally, we included a couple of stories to articulate that, but one that always comes to mind or jumps out to me is Jeffrey Lurie when he took over the Philadelphia Eagles, and how he really took time to just observe. And almost in clipboard fashion, he would just look at what was going wrong and acknowledge it in his head. And he just slowly observed and watched, and then began to build up information by going out to other organizations as to how they, in fact, could get better, what they should be aspiring to. So that process is, again, that's the spirit of that stage.
When you confront a brutal fact and you communicate that brutal fact to your leadership team and to your employees, there could be a situation where you might potentially lose some employees because now that they see the organization is not doing well. And how do you deal with a situation like that?
Yeah, there's no doubt that's a reality. We dealt with that in the book a little bit later, but that is definitely a byproduct of this very early concept of embracing this reality, the hard truth, if you will, the ugly truth, as I said. But I think you deal with that by accepting it, right? And you accept that, hey, no problem here. There's no love lost. I mean, we can still respect each other and acknowledge that you're comfortable with where the organization might be and I'm not. And so we might have to move forward. And that's something that I think you just need to embrace to a certain extent and accept, as I say, that there are going to be people who are not going to want to move to that next stage. And there is this natural weaning out. And it's not so much because one person's right and one person's wrong. I think to a large extent it's simply because there's a divergence of paths. Up to a certain point, the organization was comfortable being something that a new leadership, a new regime, or a mental shift, whatever the case might be, essentially altered the path. And now it's not okay to be what we once were yesterday. And in the process of that shift, it's, as you point out, natural that some people they're not going to want to change.
Now that leaders observed and figured out what's the root cause of the problem and want to diagnose that problem, tell me how a leader will take on that challenge and implement the step 2 that you discussed within your book.
Yeah, I think step 2 in many ways is it includes a lot of what is talked about in professional development. developing your vision, your value, understanding your values, developing and committing to goals. That's a lot of the foundational work that we try to put forward in that second step. And it's really creating that skeleton of what it is we want to be, and creating that blueprint, if you will. It's getting up on the whiteboard and sketching out, what is our vision? Where do we want to go? How do we want to get there? How do we want to act, and what do we want to represent as we try to advance and move forward? And that's the essence of what we're trying to get across. So in terms of the natural progression, I mean, first we have to embrace the fact that we need to change. We have to embrace the idea that we're not where we want to be in stage one, and it's that leading past losing, we've lost, but just keep plodding forward, and then get to this place where you can kind of breathe a sigh of relief, acknowledge that we've accepted that we want to move forward, and now we're going to commit to this concept. We're really going to commit to who we want to be, and this vision, as I say, of where we want to go.
Tell me a little bit about step 3, where you talk about changing behaviors.
Yeah.
So my first question is, can you really change people's behaviors?
Yeah. This idea that we can go through schooling, and in the process we can learn and we can adjust our modes of thinking, we can better understand different contexts and concepts, and slowly kind of evolve into different people to a certain extent. So to that end, I do think there is an element of behavior change that we're naturally going through every day, and our society supports. But as it relates to the organization, I think there is this essential element of, we did one thing one way yesterday, and now we're going to do something a completely different way, and you're either going to hop on board with the new way, or we're going to agree to disagree, and in the process part ways. I think that is, and you touched on it earlier, that really is a critical stage that organizations go through, that we have to flush out the behaviors of the old. We're no longer doing it that way because it didn't work. So now we have to find a new way to do things, and that's jarring. That's jarring.
Can you share a story, because I know you shared a story about Annie and Marilyn, who actually changed the behavior of the people?
Yeah, well, I think Annie Shabazian at Loyal and Marymount, at their child care center, she came in at a time when the child care center was really struggling. There were some internal issues. The care of the children was not where it should be, and the organization wasn't operating as effectively as it should. So she spent a lot of time really on education, right? She really spent a lot of time just educating these employees and these professionals on how they could be better. And that ranged from very tactical, oriented presentations where guest speakers would come in and talk about best practices in daycare centers, in child care and child development, things along these lines, all the way to very just day-to-day examples of, maybe it's not best to listen to music on your iPad during the course of a workday. Just simple things. But at the same time, when you're in a culture that, if you don't know any better, and the previous culture supported those types of behaviors, like listening to your iPad, then maybe you just don't know. So just having someone point it out. The Marilyn Mercedes story is of a woman who owns a diner in Chester, New Jersey, in fact, and it's just an incredible story of not just her personal story of this woman who worked for 20 years as a waitress making around $2 an hour, and just kind of kept going until eventually she winds up purchasing and owning a diner. But it's also just an incredible story of someone who's working to support a certain level of behavior. And she tells 2 stories of, it's pretty fascinating actually. A regular customer stopped coming in, and she noticed this, and over time it started to alarm her. So she knew where the customer worked. She went to his work, and in the process of going to his work, she teased it out of him that a few weekends prior, him and his wife had been served cold toast, and that was a concern of Marilyn. So her next stop was to go to the house of the waitress who served them, and then sit down with her and talk. what happened, what was the situation that played out. And after some discussion, Marilyn was able to impress upon the waitress that it's essential that those details are shorn up and those details are taken care of. They're served warm toast, if you will. But what's interesting is she put it in terms of the dollars and cents, right? Because that waitress was getting $5 tip from this couple every Sunday, and that was just guaranteed $5 that was essentially stripped out of her earnings because of one a little bit of a lapse of attention and detail. So, and she also talks about things she does to support her employees with Christmas gifts, and she tells a really interesting story of the cook who was essentially an inexperienced cook who had come with the restaurant when it was really failing and hadn't really proven himself, but it was a young individual, really needed a job, wanted a job, was dedicated to trying to learn his trade, had asked Marilyn if he could stay on. She asked, well, why would I keep you on? And he essentially said, I'm going to work hard. I'm going to give you everything I have. And in the process of her hearing his pitch, she not only agreed to keep him on, but she actually raised his salary, which I just think is an incredible testament to that concept of advancing loyalty, to the concept of proving to people that you're going to get their back even though they may not have proven themselves yet. And that creates, at least in Marilyn's case, this pretty strong bond that has now kept this team together after a few years and proven successful.
One of the things I like about your book that you have told stories of some of the small businesses also in the book. I see that most of the business books out there giving example of Fortune 1000 companies, Fortune 500 companies, and small businesses sometimes cannot relate to those stories. So I think that's one of the reasons your book is going to be powerful and is going to be relevant for everybody, all businesses out there. I wanted to also find out from you about Kim's story from Baylor University, where you talked about now that you are teaching your team on how to change the behavior, you are modeling the behavior. How do you reinforce that? How do you make sure that it doesn't get lost?
Yeah, I think that in terms of two keywords that jump to mind as it relates to maintaining those values and the behavior and the culture, as you're talking about, really expectation and accountability. Those are the two words that jump to my mind. And you mentioned Kim Mulkey at Baylor and her women's basketball program, and that's something she's a genius at, right? Is this idea of establishing expectation and maintaining a system of accountability. And I think that when you can work that into your culture, then there's a benefit. And there's a long-term benefit in that it's explicit. What we're trying to do on the day-to-day is something that we all understand. And when we don't hit those marks, there is a sense of accountability and there's an ownership where people understand it, and it's not about pointing fingers to say you're wrong or I'm right or anything along those lines. It's more about understanding where breakdowns occur and being able to shore them up, being able to fix them so they don't occur again. I really enjoyed this stage. I enjoyed all of them, but this stage I enjoy a great deal in that it for me, it provides leaders and teams with a sense of control as it relates to crises and as it relates to obstacles. And I think it just opens my mind, if not other people's, to the idea that these challenges that we continually face don't have to be frustrations. To a large extent, they can be opportunities that we embrace. And I don't mean that in the cliched sense. I mean that in a very rich and sincere sense, that the obstacles that are in front of us are going to define us and our abilities. And I think by shifting your mindset and not fearing failure, not fearing these crucibles, and really looking for them and being excited when they emerge and they arise, can be an empowering mental perspective. And as it plays out in the book, individuals like Bill Stoneman of the Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim and Patrick Doyle and his leadership team of Domino's Pizza. I mean, I think they have a unique perspective as it relates to this. And when you look at Patrick Doyle and his team, they've essentially made a marketing campaign around embracing problems. It is amazing sometimes how by embracing our foibles, we can gain the trust of others. And that plays out individually as much as it plays out organizationally. By going out through the context of an organization and saying, hey, this is where we made a mistake, we own it, we're going to make good on it, and this is how. I think it really brings people into the fold, and it really highlights that value of honesty and self-reflection, those values of self-reflection and honesty. And similarly, as you move beyond this, I don't want to say the act, I'll say, of embracing those challenges, of embracing those crucibles, you also bleed into this territory that we tried to exemplify with Bill Stoneman and the Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim, that you can not only can you as an organization grow by embracing these challenges, but you can also, in fact, develop resiliency. So the next time these challenges occur, you're calloused and you're stronger. And in so many ways, it's intuitive. I mean, your muscles grow from breaking down. Your calluses build from breaking down. You get stronger when you break down. And the same, to a large extent, is true emotionally of a larger team or an organization, that we can in fact get stronger by looking at where we've been weak in the past. We can in fact get stronger by embracing our struggles. And I think that's just an empowering concept.
Now let's talk about a little bit about your step 5, where you talk about achieving success.
This is our way of defining terms a little bit differently than may be mainstream. We sort of deal with crisis, in our conception of things, deal with crisis a little bit differently than this very proactive and healthy way of continuing to advance the organization. Simply by asking yourselves, hey, are we succeeding on all levels? I mean, you could be great in one area and really be failing in another, and that, to a large extent can be considered a crisis, and perhaps should be considered a crisis, but it also starts to shift into, as I was saying, this kind of less spoken about area of how are we defining our success? And in turn, how are we adapting to constantly stay ahead of trends and stay ahead of the times? Because these are challenges right in front of us every day, right? I mean, tomorrow is going to be a completely different day than yesterday was. So what are we doing as an organization to stay ahead of that and to adjust and change accordingly? And when you talk about success, I mean, I just think that's such an overwhelming concept. I mean, what does that even mean? Because I could be the best dad in the world and just be an utter failure as a business person, but how do you reconcile that? Does that mean I'm a failure as a human being, or does that mean I'm somewhere in the middle, or what does that even mean? So we use that story of Tufts University and their lacrosse program to really highlight this concept of continually redefining success.
I believe you talked about Mike Daly, right?
Yeah, Mike Daly and his efforts to advance this team. And it's really an amazing little story, right? That I'm pretty confident few people have heard. But you look into that team, academically, Tufts is a well-recognized institution, and oftentimes people consider it as a successful place to be. And then you, at a certain time, about 10, 15 years ago, you put the microscope on their lacrosse program, and it's horrible. They were not good. Enter Mike Daly, a guy who had never played the sport, and he rose the expectations. He said, perhaps we can be a little better than we are. He learned, they learned, everyone started to grow, and they started to win. But what's so fascinating about that story, and why I think it highlights this idea of what is success and how can we continually define it so that we as an organization can evolve, is that it was never good enough. There was always this idea that maybe we can be a little better. We had 5 wins this season. Well, maybe we should shoot for 6. We started winning in conference. Well, maybe we could win our conference. We won our conference. Well, maybe we could win the national championship. And these questions just naturally resulted because of their competitive drive, their desire to be as good as they could be. But what's interesting when you look at this particular story is it didn't stop there. Because then it was, well, we won a national championship. Well, maybe we could be, really outstanding students and athletes. Well, maybe we can do a lot more as it relates to community service. Well, maybe we can have our individual athletes who were not only competitive, but excelling in the classroom, all-American athletes. Maybe they could go on to serve the country. Maybe they could go on to serve nonprofits. And these questions started to just take this program to a completely different level, and now they're just operating in this mode of success. So just that idea of continuing to ask, how can we be successful, and never stopping. I think that's actually one element of sport that I think business can really learn a tremendous amount from. Because one thing that sports provides is a very clear start and finish. You have your 2012 season. You have the preparation that leads to the 2012 season, but when that final whistle blows, it's over. And you either failed or you succeeded, and depending on where you fall, you have motivation going into that next season. And you also have answers about what we did well, what we could learn from, and so on and so forth. And that's one element that I would love to see more businesses, it would be exciting for me to see more businesses experiment with this idea of finite projects, essentially. You're going to be on this project for 6 months. And in the process, we're going to have very clear measurables that you failed or you succeeded, and we're going to be able to analyze that at the end to learn and move forward. I also think there's a motivating element to that too. Yeah, I think nurturing this culture of success is really the most elusive of the stages that we go through. I think you see a lot of organizations get to stage 4, stage 5, and to use an analogy, it's sort of, when you think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it's that transcendent stage, that final stage, so you don't see as many organizations or individuals getting there, and that's for a lot of reasons. It takes time. It takes commitment. It takes some consistency among the leadership. And that's almost a whole other discussion, but oftentimes you see organizations on the right path and then leadership leaves, or there's a shift in some way, shape, or form. So moving beyond just the reality that this is the more elusive stage, what we're trying to get across here is that there is a manner in which organizations can operate so that they continue to stay at the top. And there's a lot of good examples that relate to this in the corporate world or in sport. I mean, we highlighted the Pittsburgh Steelers. We also highlighted Montgomery County school system in the world of education as organizations that had not only hit a high mark, but really over time managed to kind of plateau at a high level. They're innovative. They're explicit and focused on innovation. They're dedicated to learning. They want to learn. They want to grow. They want to not only learn about themselves and their industry, but they're willing to look out onto other industries. You look at, in the book, we talk about Jerry Wiest, and he's was a superintendent of Montgomery County school systems in Maryland, and he wanted to learn, not just about his school system, but he wanted to learn what are CEOs doing? What are other school districts doing? What is this organization or that organization doing? To the point where he actually built a a club, essentially, a group of individuals, of business leaders within the community, and went to them and said, what are you doing to advance your organizations? He didn't go to other superintendents, he went to CEOs and executives. So I think that spirit of learning is alive and well in these organizations that sustain cultures of excellence. And the other thing they do is they're just very intuitively focused on culture. They understand their culture, and they're constantly trying to develop and advance that entity. And I find that particularly fascinating, and Tony Hsieh of Zappos has talked about this, and other CEOs have talked about this. Schultz of Starbucks have talked about this culture of excellence. And I think that the more leaders just in fact focus on culture, the more opportunity there is to develop and advance and really just keep that plateau of year after year, we're doing well. And when you think about that, I mean, that's in everything. You know, we highlighted Dan Rooney of the Pittsburgh Steelers, and they're looking at the layout of their offices, the color scheme, what they're doing with the community, what they're doing internally, how their interactions are being developed and maintained. I mean, he told us a story of how, for example, their offices were structured so that the marketing team's not going to naturally be talking with the development team. What they did is they had those departments closer together. But if the marketing team is going to naturally be talking to the sales team, they structured them so that they're going to put them on opposite corners of the building, so that they're going to continue to walk past the other teams that they normally wouldn't talk as much to. So there's a lot of thought going into how they can develop the sense of community and what are these values that are important to them, and so on and so forth. So I think those are really the three key elements that go into this long-term sustainability of a culture of success. It's that innovation, learning, and culture itself.
I think that what motivates people is constant recognition. Because if you really want to turn out a team, we have to find the root cause of what motivates people. So what drives a team? What motivates the team?
You know, I have some interest, I'll just say different perspectives on this. And I think that I've spent a lot of time looking at different theorists, and there's a perspective that's developed within me that all people want to achieve. And that achievement is something that is essentially sewn into our DNA. We want to move forward, we want to advance, we creep, then we crawl, then we walk, then we run. I have a developmental background, and I think that for all intents and purposes, much of our human development is, or at least can be, sewn into the concept of achievement. We're constantly evolving and moving forward. And to that end, I think all people want to essentially be put in positions where they can achieve. They can see their growth. And I think that you're spot on, that we want to continually be reminded that we're advancing and moving forward, and we also genuinely want to feel that. And I think when you can build that into your organization, then you're really firing on all cylinders. A lot of times, I talk with different groups and different individuals, and a lot of times people will say, oh, well, this particular group is not motivated, or this particular individual is not motivated. And oftentimes, an immediate follow-up is, well, are they showing up? And then if the answer is yes, they're motivated. Because if they're getting up out of bed in the morning to show up, they're more motivated than you would think. They're getting there. Are they doing the job? Are they doing the base requirement that you're asking them? Yes. Because this is oftentimes the exchange you have with people when they say, oh, we're not motivated. Or are they doing the base requirement? Yes. Well, then they're really motivated. Then they're really giving you a lot. So now what happens is the question has to be, am I establishing goals, culture, an environment where people can succeed and achieve on a level higher than that base level? And usually that's when you start to get into gray area. Usually then leaders, if you will, start to unearth that there's more that could be done. Because a lot of times it's not so much about the individual team players, it's more about what the leaders are asking the team players to do and giving them the framework to achieve as it relates to those larger goals. Because that's a whole other area too, right? Where sometimes you establish expectations that are too high, and then a level of frustration can occur.
I know that you're an entrepreneur in heart. I know you you're the co-founder of Mino Consulting. So tell me, how did you ended up starting your own business?
It had a tremendous amount to do with serendipity. I was in graduate school at the time and was working as a consultant for the university I was attending with my current business partner, and we had developed a working relationship with a government agency, and the contract had run its course. And we were nearing graduation at a certain moment, and they had approached us and said, "We've enjoyed working with you. Would there be interest in perhaps continuing the professional relationship?" And clearly there was interest on our end, but they more or less provide the caveat that it would essentially require us to start our own business. So it was with an agency out of the Department of Justice, and we thought that it made sense. It was a government contract, and essentially they provided us with the foundation and said that we'll be your first client. And in the process of embracing that challenge, we've essentially been working to build from that initial client to slowly introducing ourselves to a larger market and creating more and more relationships. So that growth came from rather humble beginnings of simply working as a consultant internally for the school that I was attending as part of my graduate assistantship, and then eventually through that work I was provided this opportunity to start Mino Consulting with my business partner, and we've just been moving forward since.
Key thing for any organization that's not doing well, that their organization must have a strong leader. What makes a good leader?
I think conviction is a great place to start. Understanding of self. When you raise that question, what would make a strong leader, I think that really, if you just start with conviction and self-awareness, those are probably the two key elements in my mind. Because regardless of your value set, if you have a level of conviction, then you're going to act on them. And similarly, if you spend time exploring who you are and you get to a place where you're not afraid to act on that, then that's going to continually be projected to the people that you're working to lead. And this is something I talk with people about, that I interact with on a professional basis. You have to be yourself. You're not going to fool anyone. You're really not. You have to understand who you are, and you have to be accepting of and embracing of that. And in the process of getting to that place, you have to hold fast onto not just who you are, but where you want to go and how you want to get there. And as you do that, as you live that out, others will follow.
When you develop a team, how do you select right people, and how do you define right people?
Malcolm Gladwell has written about this and how we're, to a certain extent, we're trying to answer larger questions with the wrong process. We're trying to understand people by engaging them for a half an hour. And we really need time. We really need to be able to see them in intense situations, because patterns of behavior are what are most likely going to dictate future behavior. It's not the answers to questions, it's what have they done in the past. And for me personally, I gravitate towards people who work hard, people who may not be able to give you everything you want today, but their ceiling is a lot higher than their competitors. And if I can see potential in someone, that's always something that's going to hook me in. If I can see an individual who works hard, may not be as polished, but has a certain skill set that projects a level of potential that perhaps we can refine this and move them forward, that's going to trump a lot of other things on my list. I want to see people who also have passion. So passion and hard work, I think, are among the biggest two for me. And in order to identify that, I think you have to dig into people's past a little bit. I think you have to really work to understand how they operate, as you mentioned, in times of crisis, how they operate when the chips are down. What are their achievements? Because a lot of times we see people come out with achievements such as degrees. I have a PhD, I have 2 master's degrees. I'm proud of all of that, but I don't know if that's a defining achievement on my end. There are other things I've done that I would point to if you ask me what are the achievements I'm most proud of. And I think when you ask people questions like that, when they point to things like a degree, or they won a certain contest, or they played with a certain team, there's a lot of people who do that. There's a lot of people who do that. What's more compelling sometimes is when they dig a little deeper and they provide us insight into how they've helped those around them, how they've taken on challenges, and how they've accepted even failures at times. I think sometimes those provide us those unique insights that really going to tell us that, hey, this is someone I want on my team.
What's the most proudest moment of your life?
The proudest moments of my life really revolve around my family. I mean, just marrying my wife was a special day and continues to be a special commitment. Having a son, we have 1 child right now. I mean, that's far and away the most exciting experience I've ever had, just being a dad and being a husband. Those are things that require a level of continual effort, and those are definitely probably the 2 highlights. Beyond that, it's almost all. It's funny how it flips around sometimes, you know, because you spend, at least for me, I've often been in a achieving mode. I want to check certain boxes. I had a goal at one point to play. I've been involved in lacrosse, and I had a goal at one point to play professionally. And I came out of a very small Division III environment, not a very successful team. I never even played in an NCAA tournament. And this goal of playing professionally was about as realistic as building my own rocket to the moon. But it was something that I kept at, and I kept trying. And a couple breaks later, I wound up as a 28-year-old on the practice squad of an indoor team of a National Lacrosse League. And a couple years through that process, I played in a few games, and that was clearly something I was proud of. I was a goal that I set, and I achieved it in spite of the obstacles, and there were a number. But that's not top of my list. I mean, and similarly with the PhD, that was a goal that I set. It's not writing a book. I mean, that's another thing that I'm certainly proud of, and it was a goal I had since I was a child. I mean, I've been passionate about writing since I remember in 8th grade. I wrote a poem, and my parents thought that it was good, and they were very they praised the effort, and that sparked me to continue to write. And I remember writing my college essay about how I wanted to be an author and I wanted to be a writer, and these are goals that I've had for a long time. I've carried with me, and it's something that I'm incredibly proud of. But you know, compared to seeing my son at the end of the day, it's not quite as important.
Different people learn differently, but what do you think is the effective learning method?
I think that there's multiple learning styles and that we all learn differently. So I don't really feel like there's one particular path that people have to go through. I think some people learn brilliantly when they just roll their sleeves up and get right in there, whereas other people want to prepare and read or study and build up an informational storehouse to best understand how to practice. So I don't think that there's any one style that is going to benefit a group better than another, which is why, at least in our efforts, we try to advance more of this experiential approach where we hope to provide a level of theoretical insight and perspective, but at the same time we want to advance conversation. We want to have multi-sensory experiences where people are convening and talking amongst each other just as much as they're listening and hearing from us. To that end, I mean, perhaps if I'm going to gravitate towards anything, I think convening may in fact be the style, the learning approach that I am most enamored with. I think this whole idea of getting a group of people in one space and putting them in a position where they can talk and interact and share ideas is rather impactful.
You talked about this in your book on step 6. The organization, in order to stay successful, they need to build a learning culture. Now, my question to you, how do you develop a learning culture within your organization?
Yeah, I think that you establish expectations that relate to learning, whether that's encouraging executives to take part in classes or encouraging executives or leadership team, for example, to take part in events like going to the World Business Forum, taking classes at Netcom Learning, reading specific books, asking individuals to read a book. You know, what's your perspective on this book? Let's hear it. Let's talk about it. And I think just taking explicit steps to discuss and convene, as I say, are enormous steps that organizations can take, because just asking and inviting the ideas of others is going to implicitly suggest that I care and that I want to learn from someone else. And so those little steps can lead to larger steps. But you hear CEOs talk about this all the time, and it's pretty ingrained in the corporate culture, this idea of inviting consultants. What are other people's perspectives from the outside? Encouraging internal discussion. What are people's perspectives from the inside? And at the same time, as I say, the reading of other people's books, the taking of classes from other organizations, and the attending of events of larger magnitude where you're going to hear an influx of ideas are all, I think, tremendously successful ways, or proven ways, I should say, of advancing a learning culture.
Daniel, I must admit that I loved this conversation with you, and I have learned tremendously. What a great experience. I want to thank you.
Thanks, Russell. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.